What happens when a millionaire CEO's perfect life is upended by a call from a daughter he never knew? James Harper had everything: power, money, control, but in the middle of a high-stakes meeting, a call from an unknown number shattered his perfect world. A soft, uncertain voice on the line asked, "Are you my dad?" And just like that, the man who thought he had planned every detail of his life discovered the one thing he never expected: a daughter. James Harper had built a life most people only dreamed about. He was the CEO of one of the fastest growing tech firms in the country, a self-made millionaire with penthouses in 3 cities, a fleet of luxury cars, and a calendar so tightly managed that even personal time came in 15-minute slots. Everything in his world was controlled, calculated, and efficient. Emotion had no place in his daily agenda, and unpredictability was something he paid other people to eliminate. He'd convinced himself that this was the only way to live: clean, structured, untouchable. He was in the middle of a high-level meeting with investors when his personal phone, the one that rarely rang, buzzed on the conference table. He ignored it at first, focused on the slideshow being presented, but when it buzzed again, then a third time, something in his gut told him to answer. He excused himself from the room, walked out into the hallway, and answered the call. "Hello," he said sharply, still thinking it might be a client or an assistant. There was a pause, then a small, uncertain voice came through the line. "Hi, are you my dad?" James froze. At first, he thought it had to be some kind of mistake, a prank, but the voice was too real, too honest. A child, a girl. She couldn't have been older than 6 or 7. Could this call change his life forever? Stay tuned to Black Struggles to find out. "Who is this?" he asked, his tone quieter now. "My name is Lily. I'm 6. Mommy's in the hospital and she won't wake up. She said if something ever happened to her, I should call this number. I found it in her bag." His mouth went dry. The hallway around him blurred for a moment as he leaned against the wall, trying to understand what he just heard. Lily, hospital, unconscious mother, a number saved for emergencies. And then, like a lightning bolt, the name came back to him: Kate Maddox. He hadn't thought about her in years. Their relationship had been brief but intense. She was creative, full of life, and totally unlike anyone he'd known. He remembered her laughter, her independence, the way she had disappeared from his world just as quickly as she had entered it. He had left for a business expansion on the East Coast and never looked back. They had lost touch, and now here he was, standing alone in a hallway, holding a phone to his ear while a 6-year-old girl claimed to be his daughter. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice now steady but urgent. "St. Bridget's Hospital," the girl said. "In Denver." Without hesitation, James turned around, walked back into the conference room, and picked up his coat. The meeting halted mid-sentence as everyone stared. "I have to go," he said. "Something more important just came up." He didn't offer an explanation. He didn't need one. For the first time in years, something had shattered his perfectly organized life, and he didn't try to fix it or ignore it. He just moved because somewhere in a hospital in Denver, a little girl who might be his daughter was waiting for him, and that was the only thing that mattered now. The hospital looked small from the outside, almost quiet compared to the chaos that had begun to stir inside James the moment he boarded the plane. The private jet had cut travel time in half, but every second still dragged. He had sat frozen most of the flight, the voice of the little girl replaying in his head over and over. He didn't know what he would find, didn't even know for certain if it was real, but something inside him told him it was. And if it was, then everything about the life he thought he understood had already changed. When he walked through the hospital's sliding doors, the cool air and sterile brightness hit him immediately. He approached the reception desk, trying to sound composed as he asked for a patient named Kate Maddox. The nurse looked up at him with a tight expression and asked if he was family. He hesitated for the briefest moment, then said yes. "Room 314, she said. "I see you're in, but visiting hours for non-immediate family are limited." He didn't respond. He was already walking. The hallway was long and quiet, the only sound coming from the soft beeping of machines behind closed doors. He found the room easily. Through the window, he could see her, Kate, pale, unmoving, her auburn hair fanned across the pillow, a breathing tube, monitors. She looked impossibly small against the wide hospital bed. She didn't look like the woman he remembered, the vibrant, fearless person who had once danced barefoot in his apartment kitchen at midnight, but she was still her, and she was still alive. Before he could open the door, someone called softly from behind, "Are you James?" He turned. A little girl stood just a few feet away, holding a stuffed bunny by one ear. She had long, pale blonde hair in a messy ponytail, soft features, and the brightest blue eyes he had ever seen, eyes that were unmistakably his. He swallowed, suddenly unsure of how to speak. The little girl tilted her head slightly, studying him with the kind of calm only children seem to possess. "You came," she said, like she wasn't surprised. "I told Mommy you would." James crouched down slowly to her level, not too close, unsure of what she was comfortable with. "Lily?" he asked. She nodded. "That's me." He stared at her, unable to believe what he was seeing. The resemblance was there, not just in her eyes, but in the way she stood, the way she didn't look away when she spoke. She was confident, but soft-spoken. He had no idea how someone so small could already feel so familiar. "Do you know why I called you?" she asked. "I think I do," he said carefully. "Your mom? She told you about me?" "Not much. Just that if anything ever happened and she couldn't talk, I should call this number. That you were my dad, but you didn't know." James felt a strange ache in his chest. The idea that Kate had prepared her daughter for this moment, had trusted her child to make that call, told him everything he needed to know. Kate had never asked him for help, never told him about Lily, never reached out, and yet she'd given her daughter his number, just in case. He nodded slowly, voice lower now. "I didn't know. I wish I had." Lily looked at him for a long time, then stepped forward and gently placed her small hand in his. "It's okay. You're here now." And just like that, something cracked open inside of him. He didn't know how to be a father, he didn't know what the next day would look like, but in that quiet hospital, holding the hand of a daughter he never knew existed, James Harper began to understand that nothing about his life, his real life, would ever be the same again. Will this unexpected family mend his broken past? Keep watching Black Struggles to see. James didn't leave the hospital that night. He had no plan, no overnight bag, no sense of what to do next, but walking away wasn't even an option. After sitting with Lily for nearly an hour, mostly listening as she told him about her school, her favorite cereal, and how she tried to braid her own hair, he watched her fall asleep in a chair beside her mother's bed, curled up with her stuffed bunny and a blanket the nurses had given her. The sight of her like that, so peaceful and small, anchored him. In a way he hadn't expected, he pulled a chair beside Kate's bed and sat in silence for a long time, watching the rise and fall of her chest, listening to the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. Kate hadn't changed so much as softened, her features were still familiar. Even under the bruising in the pale hospital light, he wondered how she had managed everything alone for 6 years. He wondered how many times she'd almost called him. He thought about the fact that she never did and what kind of pride or pain had kept her from reaching out. A nurse eventually came in to check on Kate's vitals and seemed surprised to see James still there. He asked a few questions about her prognosis, about the trauma, but the answers weren't comforting. She was stable, yes, but still unresponsive. The doctors were monitoring for signs of brain activity, for involuntary movement, anything that might hint at recovery, but for now, it was wait and see, and wait and see had never been part of James Harper's vocabulary. The next morning, he called his assistant and canceled everything: meetings, travel, calls. When she hesitated, reminding him of how many people were involved in the negotiations scheduled that week, he said firmly, "Family emergency, indefinite leave." He moved into a hotel 2 blocks from the hospital and visited every day, sometimes twice. Lily began to expect him. They started having breakfast together in the hospital cafeteria, pancakes and orange juice for her, black coffee, and whatever she convinced him to try for him. He walked her to the pediatric wing's playroom when nurses insisted she take breaks, and she introduced him to her favorite nurse like he was someone who'd always been there. They didn't talk much about the situation. Lily didn't ask about the past, she didn't need explanations, she simply included him quietly and fully in her small world. And James, despite all his years of structured control and isolation, found himself craving that inclusion. One afternoon, as they colored quietly in the waiting area, Lily asked him if he had ever drawn a unicorn. He admitted he hadn't. She handed him a pink crayon and said, "It's never too late to try something new." It was such a simple statement, but it stopped him. He realized then that his whole life had been built on certainty, on numbers, strategy, outcomes, and now in a quiet hospital hallway beside a child who had his eyes and her mother's fearless calm, he was beginning something he couldn't plan or predict. That evening, after Lily had gone home with a nurse to get some rest, James returned to Kate's room alone. He sat beside her, took her hand, and spoke aloud for the first time since the night he arrived. "I don't know if you can hear me," he began, voice low, "but I'm here and I'm not going anywhere." He paused, glancing toward the monitors, then back to her still face. "I didn't know about Lily, but I know now, and she's incredible, smart, strong, brave. You raised her well, and now it's my turn to be what she needs. I'm not going to run this time, so if you can fight your way back, Kate, we're waiting, we're both waiting." He stayed with her until the room grew dark and quiet and his eyes began to close. For the first time in years, James Harper didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for once, he wasn't afraid of that. James quickly learned that hospitals had their own rhythm, slow and repetitive on the surface, but always carrying a low hum of urgency beneath it. The days began to blur into each other as he settled into a routine that was completely foreign to the life he used to know. Each morning started with coffee that tasted like cardboard and an early check-in with the nurses, followed by hours spent in Kate's room, sometimes reading to her, sometimes just sitting in silence. Every few hours, he'd break Away to see Lily, who had become a bright grounding force in his day, she asked questions that no adult dared to, like why the lights in the ICU were always too bright or why the walls didn't have pictures. She had an honesty that pierced straight through him, never rude, only curious, and always brave. One afternoon, James had just finished helping Lily with a simple art project, and a woman walked into the waiting area with a clipboard in hand and a carefully measured smile on her face. She introduced herself as a social worker assigned to Kate's case. Her tone was polite but firm as she requested to speak with him privately. James followed her down the hall to a small consultation room, not fully sure what to expect. Once the door closed, she got straight to the point. She explained that because Kate was still in a coma with no known legal guardianship assigned, the hospital had a responsibility to ensure Lily's safety. They were grateful he had stepped in, but technically he had no legal claim to the child. James felt his stomach knot as she spoke, the thought of someone else stepping in to decide Lily's future hitting him harder than he expected. He assured the social worker that he had every intention of staying involved and that he would do whatever was required to protect her. She nodded, professional but unmoved, and said that paternity would need to be confirmed. The next day, James took a DNA test. There was no doubt in his mind, but he understood the system needed proof. Still, the process made everything feel suddenly fragile. What had started to feel like family was now under scrutiny, and he hated the idea of Lily sensing that shift. But she surprised him again when he gently explained that some people needed paperwork to understand who he was to her. Lily just shrugged and said, "You're my dad." "I already know that. They'll figure it out." James could only smile and nod, feeling something in his chest pull tight. He was struck by how much trust this little girl had already placed in him, even though he had done nothing to earn it before. Now, she gave freely what most adults held back, and it humbled him. At night, he found himself replaying moments from the past, the last time he'd seen Kate, the way she had kissed him goodbye without bitterness, just a soft sadness in her eyes. She hadn't tried to stop him from leaving, and he hadn't asked her to wait. He realized now that she must have known then, maybe not about the child, but that she wouldn't reach out, that she would raise Lily on her own rather than disrupt his world. He wondered what that said about the man he had been back then, and what kind of man he wanted to be now. Late that evening, James sat once again by Kate's bedside. Her face was still, but somehow softer than before. He spoke to her again just as he had every day. "I want you to wake up," he said quietly, "not just for Lily, for you, for us. I know I should have been there, and I can't change that, but I'm here now and I'm not going to disappear again." As he held her hand, he thought he felt the faintest twitch. It could have been nothing, a muscle reflex, a trick of the light, but James didn't let go. He stayed still, eyes fixed on her fingers, heart pounding with a new kind of hope. The next morning brought with it a kind of quiet James hadn't experienced since arriving in Denver. Something in the air felt different, as if the hospital itself was holding its breath. When he arrived at Kate's room, he found a nurse already there checking vitals with more urgency than usual. She turned to James with a look he hadn't seen before, surprise edged with cautious optimism. Kate had moved, not a reflex, not a twitch, but actual deliberate movement. Her fingers had curled around the bed sheet, her eyelids had fluttered. There had even been a faint groan that broke through the silence of the room like the first crack of a frozen lake. James stepped closer, heart racing as he looked at her. She still lay still, her face pale and fragile, but there was unmistakable life beginning to surface. The nurse told him the doctors would be in soon to assess, but she didn't need to say more. James could already feel it. Something was changing. He sat down in the chair he had claimed as his own and gently took her hand. He didn't speak at first, just sat there breathing with her, letting the moment ground him. Later that afternoon, Lily arrived holding a drawing she had made that morning, 3 figures standing under a tree labeled carefully in her uneven handwriting, "Mommy, me, and Daddy." She handed it to James with pride, unaware of the tears that stung his eyes as he looked at it. When he told her that her mom had started to wake up, her face lit up in a way he hadn't seen before. She didn't jump or scream. Instead, she just stood there very still, her eyes wide and hopeful. Then she whispered, "Can I talk to her?" James brought her to Kate's bedside and lifted her gently so she could be closer. Lily leaned in and rested her small hand on her mother's arm. "Hi, Mommy," she said quietly. "I'm here, and Daddy is here. We've been waiting for you." Kate didn't respond, but her monitor began to change slightly, a subtle shift that the nurse watching from the door later confirmed as increased brain activity. Something about Lily's voice had reached her. James watched the moment unfold, emotion thick in his throat, and realized that even if Kate didn't fully wake up that day, the return had already begun. The following days were a blur of tests, cautious updates, and steady improvement. Kate's eyes finally opened 2 mornings later. At first, she only blinked, her pupils slow to adjust to the light, her body weak and barely responsive, but she was awake and she recognized him. Her gaze lingered on his face, her expression puzzled at first, then emotional, as if her mind was racing to put the puzzle together. She tried to speak, her voice raw and broken, but James leaned in, pressing her hand gently. And shaking his head, "You don't have to say anything, I'm here," he said, "and I'm not going anywhere over the next few days." Her voice returned in fragments. They kept conversation short at the doctor's request, but with every small exchange, James could feel something healing, not just in her, but in him, too. The past began to come back piece by piece. She remembered the accident, remembered taking Lily to the park, remembered the headache that struck just before she lost consciousness. Then one afternoon, when James was helping adjust her pillows, she looked at him and asked in a whisper, "Why did you come?" He paused, not because he didn't know the answer, but because there were too many. He looked at her and said quietly, "Because I had to, because she called me, because I should have never left in the first place." Kate closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. There was no bitterness in her expression, only exhaustion, and maybe something softer, like forgiveness trying to find its way forward. That night, James walked Lily home from the hospital under a quiet sky. She reached for his hand without asking, and he held hers tightly. When they reached the apartment, she turned to him before going inside and said, "When Mommy gets better, will we still be together?" James crouched down to look her in the eyes, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Yes," he said without hesitation, "we're already together." And for the first time, it didn't feel like something he was trying to fix. It felt like something real, something earned, something that was finally beginning. Kate's recovery unfolded slowly, with quiet victories that only those who had waited in uncertainty could truly appreciate. Each day brought a little more strength, a little more clarity. First came her ability to sit upright without support, then short walks with a physical therapist down the hallway, her steps shaky but determined. James was there for every milestone, not hovering but present in the way that mattered, always in the room, always steady, always watching with the kind of focus she had never known from him before. They began to talk more, not about the past at first, but about Lily, about routines, about her physical therapy schedule. James told her how Lily had managed the first night alone, and how she had quietly taken over his mornings with requests for pancakes and cartoons before school. He made her laugh once, describing his failed attempt to braid Lily's hair, which had ended in knots and glitter everywhere. Kate smiled at that, her voice still thin but genuine when she said, "I didn't think you'd be the type to stick around." James didn't respond right away. He reached for her water cup, handed it to her, then sat back down. When he did answer, his voice was low and serious. "I wasn't the type, but I should have been. I'm trying to be now." There was no grand apology, no drawn-out explanation of why he left or why he never called. She didn't ask for one. Maybe she didn't need it. Maybe she already knew time had a way of stripping people down to the truth. They both understood more with silence than they had with words all those years ago. Meanwhile, Lily had grown even more attached to both of them. She transitioned seamlessly into a shared world that had once been divided by absence. After school, she spent afternoons with James at the hospital, bringing her books, stories, and drawings. Nurses came to recognize the three of them as a kind of unit. It was unspoken, but visible in every glance, every routine, every moment of quiet understanding between them. One evening after Kate had been cleared to leave the hospital and had moved into a short-term rehabilitation apartment nearby, the three of them sat on a park bench across the street. It was sunset and the light made everything feel suspended in warm gold. Lily was telling a long, winding story about her favorite teacher while James and Kate listened like it was the most important thing in the world. When Lily ran ahead to chase a bird near the fountain, Kate turned to James. Her eyes were tired but focused. "I don't want to go back to how things were before," she said, "not just with you, with any of it. I used to run on autopilot, work, parenting, barely sleeping. I didn't realize how much of myself I'd buried." James nodded, understanding more than he could say. "I thought I had everything," he admitted, "but it turns out I was just busy, not whole." "You and Lily, you've changed that." Kate smiled just faintly and leaned her head back against the bench. "We've still got a lot to figure out." He looked toward Lily, who was now twirling with her arms out, letting the last light of day fall over her like a crown. "We'll figure it out," he said. Together, there was no need for declarations or rushed decisions. They had already begun to rewrite everything, not in bold strokes, but in small, steady lines, the kind of changes that last, the kind that matter. The day of Lily's 7th birthday arrived with more sunlight than usual, as if the sky itself had decided to bless the occasion. It was a Saturday, warm and quiet, and James had insisted on planning everything himself. He rented out a small community garden near the rehab center, decorating it with streamers and pastel balloons. There were tables filled with cupcakes, sandwiches, and small bowls of fruit shaped like stars. Nothing extravagant, but every detail was intentional, thought through with the kind of care he'd never used for anything outside of business deals before. Kate stood by the entrance, still a little unsteady on her feet, but stronger now. She wore a soft blue dress and had her hair loosely tied back. Watching James guide Lily around the garden, introducing her to a few local kids, and helping her pick music for the little speaker they brought, she felt a knot rise in her chest. It wasn't grief or regret, it was something deeper, a strange, quiet mix of joy and disbelief. After Everything they had been through, after all the uncertainty and absence, the three of them were standing in the same place, smiling, living. When Lily spotted her mom, she ran over and threw her arms around Kate's waist. "Best day ever," she declared, "and we haven't even done presents." James joined them a minute later, holding something behind his back. Lily's eyes lit up immediately. "Is that for me?" she asked. Already bouncing in place, he knelt in front of her and brought out a small, carefully wrapped box. Inside was a charm bracelet, delicate in silver, with one tiny charm already attached, a heart with her initial engraved on it. "Every year," he said, "we'll add one, something that tells part of your story." Lily beamed, then surprised him by lunging forward and hugging him tight. "I love it," she said, "but you know what I really wished for?" "What?" James asked. She looked between him and Kate, then said without hesitation, "That we stay together for good, like a family." The words hung in the air, too sincere to ignore and too innocent to brush aside. Kate reached for Lily's hand and squeezed it. James looked at both of them and felt something shift inside him. Not a decision, not a plan, but something rooted deeper than logic, a truth. He rose slowly and reached into his jacket again, this time pulling out a much smaller box. It was wrapped simply, no ribbons, no flash. Kate stared at it for a second before realization crept into her face. Her breath caught in her throat as he opened the box, revealing a modest but beautiful ring. Classic, understated, perfect. "I don't want to rush you," he said, his voice low, steady, "and I don't expect anything to be like it was before, but I know who I am now. I know what matters. I want to be part of this life with both of you. If you'll let me." Kate didn't speak right away. Lily looked up at her, holding her hand tightly. There were tears in Kate's eyes, but not from fear or confusion, they were from clarity. She nodded once, then whispered, "Yes." Lily clapped so hard she almost knocked over the cupcake table. The three of them laughed, a little breathless, a little overwhelmed, but entirely present. They didn't make promises about perfection, they didn't talk about the past like it needed fixing. Instead, they chose each other again, not in some grand gesture, but in a quiet moment filled with honesty and hope. For James, it wasn't about being the CEO or the man with all the answers. For the first time, he was just someone's father, someone's partner, someone who had gotten a second chance and was brave enough to take it. As the sun dipped below the trees and the party wound down, Lily danced barefoot on the grass, twirling with the bracelet glittering on her wrist, and James looked over at Kate, who met his gaze with a small, certain smile. They didn't need anything else, they already had everything they hadn't even known they were missing. What makes the ending of this story so meaningful to me is that it doesn't rely on perfection, it leans into healing. It's not a fairy tale where everything magically falls into place. It's the story of people who were broken in quiet, private ways, finding their way back to something whole together. James doesn't just redeem himself by showing up, he earns his place slowly, with presence, with patience, with love. Kate's forgiveness isn't immediate, and that feels honest. She allows herself to be cautious, but she also allows herself to hope again. And Lily, in all her innocence and strength, becomes the bridge between what was and what could be. The proposal at the end isn't about romance in the traditional sense, it's about choosing family. It's about saying we're better together, not because it's easy, but because it's real. I love that their happiness isn't loud, it's soft, steady, and deeply human. It reminds us that second chances aren't always given, they're built, and when they are, they're worth everything. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Black Struggles to help us share more stories of healing and hope. We'll see you in the next one.